say, like, even if we did, even if you had a photographic memory and you could remember every part of your life and you'd built this self story about you being, a not confident person, should you still let it define what you do going forward? Should you still let it stop you asking a question in class, or asking someone out on a date, or applying for something that takes you outside of your comfort zone? Because if your answer to that question is yes, your life is like this now. You live in a box.
I suppose, Nick, as you were kind of describing that idea of walking up to someone, asking them out on a date, I could imagine lots of different thoughts and feelings coming to your mind. Maybe something like, they're never going to like me. I'm not popular. I'm not confident. I don't do this well, or I don't do that well. And I just wondered a little bit, how do you think that those thoughts or those stories might maybe influence your likelihood of approaching that difficulty and asking someone on a date, for example?
I think that the notion of self stories is really important, and I think that they're particularly maybe strong thoughts. So of course we have lots and lots of thoughts and feelings, and in that situation when you're approaching someone, you'd have lots and lots of thoughts and feelings, but some of them have the power to influence our behavior more than others. And some thoughts and feelings that have that sort of power are what I call, or others in the field call, self stories. And these are sort of essentially ways that we describe our own personality. So for example, I'm not a confident person would be something that you've said, or I'm not a popular person. And there's something more fixed and stable about a self story than just a thought or a transient thought. And because of that, we interact with those self stories like they're real or they're true, as if they can't be argued with, as if they can't be disproved. And so as you're approaching someone, if you've got like an I'm not a confident person self story, well, maybe you turn around and you don't approach that person because of your story. And so I think that, and I talk about self stories, I think it's chapter 3 of the book, and the role that self stories can have in imprisoning us, in stopping us from being able to do things. If you have an I'm not good at public speaking self story, do I come on the podcast and do this with you today, even though it's in line with what I really want? Or if you have like I'm not good at interview story, do you not go for interviews? Like, in what ways do your stories imprison you and stop you from doing the things that are important? What about like I'm not good at sport? What, all sports? You're not good at all sports? What does that mean for you? Does that mean you don't get to try? You don't get to try and do things? And so, like, I think in the book, I list a load of. I'm trying to look now. I list a load of stories like I'm kind, or I'm helpful, I'm helpless, I'm anxious, I'm confident, I'm broken, I'm honest, I'm humble, I'm creative, I'm boring, I'm geeky, I'm positive, I'm smart, I'm stupid. Like, all of these are different sentences that we use to describe who we truly are. And because we think they describe who we truly are, we think that they have the right to like define what we do. And so I talk about maybe some better ways of interacting with self stories that will allow you to still do things that are important to you, even when you've got a self story. And I'll just give you an example. Like, I've got a big I'm not smart enough self story. It's been there for a long time, and there are a few questions that you can ask yourself about this, which is, one, where did it come from? And 2, how has it impacted my life? And even 3, how do I interact with it in a more flexible way so that it doesn't impact my life? And so 1, like, where did it come from? Well, it probably came from my experiences in the past. Like, maybe some things have happened in my past where I haven't done particularly well, say academically, or I've been in a conversation where other people are speaking, I don't really understand what's going on. And so now I've started to build this I'm not smart enough self story, and I look for it now. I discount my A star. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for confirmation of the fact that I'm not smart enough, right? And then you start asking yourself, all right, so I've built this I'm not smart enough self story. I'm constantly looking for ways to support my self story, because that helps me to understand the world a little bit better and understand my role in the world. And then you're like, okay, so maybe I should apply for a degree at Oxford University. And then you get the I'm not smart enough. I've got an I'm not smart enough self story. So I'm like, there's no point. And all of a sudden, my self story has now stopped me from doing something that maybe I wanted to pursue. And then you get the third question, which is, how do I relate to my self story in a more functional way, in a way that allows me to still do things? And I think that for me, it was just becoming aware that self story is a thing, that I do take information from my experiences and I build these stories about myself because they help me to interact with the world in a more efficient way. And that sometimes those stories, they don't help me to move towards the things that are important to me. I really view myself in a particular sort of way, and I view that way as being fixed. I am this sort of person, and with that, I now do these things. And to let go of that, to be able to like hold your stories lightly, to understand like how they came into being, to understand they might not be based on reality, because like our memories aren't good enough to track every experience we have throughout every day of our life. And to hold them lightly and really think carefully about what's important and what I'd like to do. It really sort of like, I find that students tend to have like a eureka moment about that, especially when they start breaking them down. They start thinking, what are my self stories? What are the things that I believe, and being able to spot them in the moment.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting when you were talking about self-stories in the book, Nick, was about how they develop and where they come from. Because it's the fact that we all have them. That's the way that, and it's almost a necessity, you know, to have them. It's almost like a shortcut, isn't it? That I'm this sort of person, so therefore I know how to interact with the world. I'm the kind of person who would say no to public speaking or wouldn't join the hockey team or whatever it is. It gives you this beliefs about yourself that informs how you interact with the world. So once those stories begin to form from when we're really quite young, and we might have some very small experience, or somebody might say something to us. I think one of the things you said was, you know, that we can spot self stories because they usually begin with I am. So it's like, I am not very good at sport, or I am a really kind person. But they often start with somebody saying to you when you're really quite young, you are. So it might be your parent or your grandma or whatever saying, oh, you're such a kind boy. And think, okay, so I'm a kind boy. So now I act in kind ways. And then what you notice, once you have those, that you start to form those beliefs or that story, you then pay more attention to the things that confirm that belief about yourself. And I think you were describing in the book a really, you know, if you could actually go back and look at a video of your early lives, you would see, we would all see all sorts of things that might have disproved that belief, but we've actually forgotten about, or we didn't pay much attention to because they didn't suit our story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that bit about stories starting off as you are, I think it's such a powerful thing, right? Because the people that surround us as we grow up, they shape us. And you can easily get labeled as not the sporty one, or not the academic one, or not good on doing shows, or, you know, there are lots of different things that you can get told by other people that you love and trust and respect. And you start to interact with those things as if they're real, as if they're true. And then, of course, that impacts your decisions. Maybe you don't, as you're growing up, try for the hockey team or try out for the football team, or maybe you don't fully commit to learning maths. Maybe you sit at the back of the class and you just think, well, I'm not the academic one anyway, so there's no point in me even like listening or trying to listen. And so the fact that they start off as you are makes them more powerful in a certain sort of way. And then after that, then we're looking for instances to support our self-story. We're looking for the time where we fail in our academic studies, or we're looking for the time where we play a game of football and we weren't very good, and then all of a sudden we get to support our stories in this confirmation bias sort of way. We haven't been able to look at all of our experiences. We can't remember all of our experiences. Who chooses what we get to remember and what we get to forget? And the bottom line is that we look for things that confirm our stories. And as a result of that, there might have been 100 times when we were great at sports, we just weren't looking for it. There might have been 100 times where we answered a question in class and the teacher thought in their mind, wow, that was a really good answer, but you didn't have access to the teacher thinking that at the time. So there might have been all these occasions that have happened that could have actually disconfirmed the stories that you had about yourself. And I said that, like, as a result of that, I hold my own self-stories really lightly. But more importantly, I hold other people's self-stories really lightly, because if I can't remember enough of my life to be able to have a really firm understanding of my self-stories, then other people who have interacted with me for very little amounts of time, they've got no right to define who I am. They don't get to tell me you're not a sporty type because they've interacted with me 4 times while I was playing sports in a 18-year life, or you know. And so it really, that was a bit of a eureka moment even for me as I was writing it, because I was just like, if you follow this through, what does this mean? Well, this means that I should place no trust in the views that other people have about me, because they're building their own stories about the world, not on a lot of information, and definitely not on all of my experiences. And so stuff them. If I've got other people telling me I am a certain sort of way, forget about that, because if I'm going to hold my own self-stories lightly, I'm going to hold other people's stories about me even more lightly. Because we just can't remember stuff to be able to build really firm and objective positions about who we are. And then I'm going on, but then I say, like, even if you had a photographic memory and you could remember every part of your life, and you'd built this self-story about you being, a not confident person, should you still let it define what you do going forward? Should you still let it stop you asking a question in class, or asking someone out on a date, or applying for something that takes you outside of your comfort zone? Because if your answer to that question is yes, your life is like this now. You live in a box. You act the way you act because you were pre-programmed to act that way, and you've got no choices. You don't get to try things. You don't get to challenge yourselves as a result of self-story. So, like, with regards to even the what you two are doing with this project, I think in some ways self-stories sits into that better than anything else in the book, which is when you challenge yourselves, watch out for the stories that your mind feeds you. And I talk a little bit about dancing. I've got a massive I can't dance self-story. I am, and of course I could list to you 4 or 5 occasions when other people or me have had bad experiences with me dancing. What does that mean for me? It means I never get to try and dance. I never get to try and improve if I listen to that self-story. So becoming aware of what are my self-stories allows me to think more carefully about what I really want, while holding my self-stories lightly, while taking them. They don't go anywhere. I'm not smart enough. I can't dance self-story. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there, but I still get to do things, and so that's the game. The game is keeping going, becoming aware of the way that our self-stories push us around, and still doing the things that are important to us.
And I can see how powerful that is. And it's interesting that that you had your eureka moment only recently, it seems, kind of writing that book about how other people's opinions of you don't define you, really. And so I kind of bring it back to some of the young people or the students that might be listening. I guess there's a few things there. There's the idea that, first of all, we've got our own self-stories that might limit us. So, for example, I'm not good at football, then I play less football. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, we say. So that means that I play less football, I keep on thinking I'm not so good at football, and it becomes then almost a reality. And then there's a second layer to that, which is people then see you shying away from football, not being very good at football because you aren't putting yourself forward. And so it's almost like that self-story gets solidified even more. So it's almost like concrete, the solidified self-story. And so I wonder, how does a young person grapple with that? How does a young person deal with that fact?
Imagine you've got a maths teacher. That maths teacher has built a story about you. They've built a story about everyone in the class. Now you've got to ask yourself why. Why has that happened? Why? Well, the reason why is because it allows them to put everybody into boxes. And when everybody is in a little box in their mind, the world is a more coherent or a clearer place to live in. It's an easier place to live in when we know who is who, when we place people into categories of these are my naughty ones, these are my clever ones, these are my vulnerable ones. So the teacher would be doing that. Now, the teacher is only doing that because they're a human being and because they're trying to categorize the world to make it an easier place to live in. So they're just doing what human beings do. But the bottom line is that they've interacted with you very infrequently. They have not had a lot of interaction with you relative to lots of other people in your life and relative to yourself. And so you get to respectfully disagree with their self-stories about you. You might not even know what those are, but you definitely, when those people tell you things about you, in your mind, you get to go, I don't think you've been around for long enough to be able to confidently tell me who I am. And so I think just like being able to understand why the teacher is doing it, that the teacher's not doing anything wrong by doing it, they're just being a human being, but that the teacher legitimately might be wrong, given that they haven't spent a lot of time with you. I think that's like one way that I would be interacting with the world, and it's a way that I interact with the world now. Like, people can have their self-stories about me, I can't do anything about it, but I also am able to not take their thoughts about me too seriously. And then you get to yourself. Yourself is trickier because you've essentially got to disagree with yourself, which is a more interesting thing to do. I think that I always ask myself this question when I'm about to make a decision about something, which is, what's my story here? So like, what is my story? What is the thing that I'm telling myself about myself that is trying to influence my decision here? I also talk about an exercise in the book where it's a bit of a tricky exercise to explain over a podcast, but essentially writing, or even in a mirror, looking at yourself and making a list of your self stories. I am this, I am that, I am this, I am that, etc., 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 and just writing them down so that you can keep an eye on them. And then I ask in the book, I ask people to notice the difference between a description and an evaluation. So like, people will be able to follow the words I am with lots of things. Me, it might be I'm 6 foot tall. I'm not actually, I'm 5'11", but don't worry. So I'm 6 foot tall, or I weigh 80 kilograms, or I've got 2 dogs. Now those things are objectively true. They're facts as such, right? But then I've got I'm an honest person, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good at dancing. And I interact with those sentences in the same way that I interact with the factual sentences. Like, it is a fact that I am not good at dancing, that I am not smart enough, or that I'm an honest person. When in fact, those sentences are slightly different because they're not descriptions. They're evaluations, they're self-evaluations, they're stories that I've built about myself for whatever reason. And those stories don't have to define any decisions that I make going forwards. And so like, really thinking about what follows I am sentences, and then figuring out whether those stories help you. If I have an I am kind story, for example, does that help me interact with the world in a way that I'm happy with? Yeah, it probably does. Do you know what? I'm going to believe that story. Fine. You know, what it functions, or it's useful in affecting my behavior. But and I'm not smart enough story, if that story stopped me from going for a job promotion, or if that story stopped me from doing a course that I'm really interested in, like at the moment, I'm not smart enough self story was trying to stop me from learning guitar. It's like, I'm not smart enough to learn guitar. That's the way that the story was functioning. It was stopping me, it was constricting my life. But of course, I was able to spot it. Oh, there it is. My old friends. Yeah, I'm not smart enough self story. Like, I can pick it up, I can hold it, I can look at it, I can think about where it came from and stuff. I can put it in my pocket and get on with trying to get better at something or taking on a new challenge.
So it's the idea of, it's first awareness. So I am having a story, it could be an evaluation story, it could be a helpful story, it could be an unhelpful story. And then the second bit, you've mentioned that word, which I think is really powerful, that distance. So actually having that almost arm's length. And you used a technique in the book, which I thought was really powerful, which is saying, I'm having the thought that I'm bad at maths, or I'm telling myself the story that I'm bad at maths. So in a way, I can understand that distancing oneself can be difficult, but in a way, by putting that at the start of that story, I'm having the thought that almost puts in that arm's length. And I thought that was quite a nice and simple way to practice that. And I know I've started to try and do that when I get those niggling thoughts that say, you're not going to be good at that, etc., etc. I'm having the thought that I'm going to do badly at that, for example.
I think even just something as simple as putting those words into a sentence, I'm having the self-story that, gives you the context to spot the self-story. It just really, it really allows you to see the self-story for what it is, which is a story that you've built about yourself, and not a truth, not a truth about you, but something that you've built, something you're distanced from.
Hello, you've just been listening to Self Stories with Nick Hooper. We're going to leave you with 3 questions to discuss amongst yourselves. Question 1, what are self stories and how might they imprison you?
Question 2, what does it mean to hold your self stories lightly? And how could that help?
And the final question is, what could you do to become aware of your own self-stories and how they might limit you? Thank you once again for watching Not the Easy Way. We hope you have a very interesting discussion and look out for new episodes coming soon.
Hey,